Serious, Night Watchmen of Reddit, what is the creepiest situation you've been in on shift? I used to work for a relatively small security company. It was privately owned, had about 30 employees altogether. They'd get a contract with a factory and then basically your job was to sit in that factory for 8 to 12 hours when no one was working in it. So I'd be working by myself, alone, overnight, in a completely empty factory. In my 2 years of doing that job, I never one time saw a single thing I would call supernatural. However, I did see Dennis. One night my captain calls me on my phone and tells me a new trainee will be coming in about 5 a.m. and to show him the ropes, teach him how to make rounds, you walk around the building, that's basically what making a round is, etc. So it's about 4:45 a.m. and I step outside to the parking lot to have a smoke and wait on the new guy. After about 10 minutes a car pulls up, stops, backs up, and drives away. I was clearly visible, so I have no idea why he left, but the car passed by about 3 to 4 more times before finally pulling in and shutting off the engine. I can see him in the car and he's just sitting in the driver's seat staring at me. In the back seat are 2 kids probably around 6 to 8. After about 3 minutes of me wondering what is going on, he gets out of the car. Dennis is messed up looking. He's about 4 feet 10 inches and fatter than damn near anyone I have ever seen. He has a huge rash covering about 70% of his body with a white crust outlining most of it. He then speaks, had a little trouble finding the place. His voice is high-pitched. I mean really high-pitched. I'm talking Judge Doom in the final scene of Who Framed Roger Rabbit high-pitched. Then he extends his hand to shake mine. Without thinking much, I shake it. There's one finger on it. One. And the rest of the hand looks like some kind of stumpy flesh mitten. One of the kids gets out of the car, has the same rash, is also very fat, is also missing fingers. He says, "Daddy, can I get a drink?" Dennis turns around and screams in that high-pitched voice, "Get back in the damn car and don't you get out again." I'm in shock, so I take the guy around the factory, show him the perimeter, tell him where emergency stuff is. About a minute into our walk I notice this guy smells like hell. I mean he literally reeks of ball sweat and fresh diarrhea. The whole time he's asking me strange questions, like, do you have a crush on anyone that works here? Or can I hunt on this property? He finally leaves after standing in the office trying to make small talk with me for about 15 minutes after the tour. On his way out he said, "We're gonna be good friends. Even if you don't think so now." I went home about 2 hours later and stood in the shower for a good solid hour washing myself, trying to get the image of that guy out of my head. Called my captain and asked him to reassign me someplace else. Never had to see him again. That's been more than 10 years and it still bothers me. I have a mild one. Last year I worked as night shift security at this place called the Desert Museum, which is essentially a zoo and botanical garden that showcases the different life found in the Sonoran Desert. It's a phenomenal place, BTW, highly recommend a visit if you find yourself in Tucson, Arizona. So towards the end of closing time all the employees leave and I lock the whole place up, including the main gates into the place. Eventually later in the night I have to go open up the gate for the custodians to leave, and while I was waiting I got bored and started playing with my flashlight, so I shine my flashlight onto a hill across the street. Here's a Google Street View so it makes sense, and see these 2 really weird glowing orbs, but once I turn the light off I can't see them anymore. And keep in mind, this place is in the middle of nowhere with a new moon, everything is pitch black. I keep playing around with it, trying to figure out what these weird reflective orbs are, until they suddenly start to move and I realize I'm an idiot because those glowing orbs were actually eyeballs, and suddenly I can see a full-grown mountain lion that I've unknowingly been having a staring contest with for the last 15 minutes. I worked a security gig in an abandoned hotel, which sat directly on the river. When the rooms had balconies, they would hang out over the water. The hotel had closed down and had been stripped bare by the owners. I'm sitting in the office, and I hear a creak, 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 from left to right on the floor above me. The hotel was wood frame and creaked like a house when someone walked around. This sounded exactly like someone walking the hall on the floor directly above the office. I go up to the next level and into the hall. The hotel itself was only 4 floors high, but long. The hall was bare walls, rooms with no doors, and only a single dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling in the middle of the hall. I have seen my share of horror movies, and know this can only be trouble, but I start walking down the hall anyway. After all, it's my job to keep people out. I get about quarter way down the hall, and I hear rustling coming from a room. I draw my mag light, one of the 3C cell ones, and get ready to use it. I slowly peek into the room and discover that it's the wind blowing in from the river and moving a curtain. Now freaked, I start checking the other floors and find nothing, but I know someone is in the building. I make my way back down to the ground floor, still finding nothing, and go into the old ballroom. It's a wide open space, resembling this, and I start walking through it. Out of the corner of my eye, I see someone moving, so I turn and shine my light on them, ready to defend myself. That's when I realized that it was my reflection in a broken mirror on the wall. After that, I noped the hell out of there and spent the rest of the night in my car in the parking lot. About 2 weeks after that, the place burned down. After all this time, I'm still convinced that someone was in the building, but I never found any evidence that there was. I worked in an abandoned hospital for a while, and it was full of WTF it seemed every night. Everything had logical explanations, but working in there alone at night was a trip. First, the doors in the stairwells had gas piston hinges that wouldn't really close the door and slowly leak out. You get the other end of the hallway and the stairwell door would slam loudly as if someone slammed the door closed. Took me a week to figure out the pattern of which doors did it. The elevators were somehow rigged together so you would go from one floor to the next, and when the door opened, the elevator across the hall or next to you would be closing like you just missed someone getting in. This shit was totally random. I once turned on the PA system with a radio next to it so I could have music throughout the building. I thought I was clever till it turned itself off when I was in another part of the building. Had an auto timeout switch. I once walked to the emergency room and there was this bloody dude holding his arm just outside the door staring at me. I froze and we just stared at each other for what seemed like an eternity plus a few hours. Then he tells me to let him in because he broke his arm. I tell him this is an abandoned hospital and he just walks out into the darkness without saying another word. Once was doing floors at night at this pipeline fittings company in the middle of the boonies and looked up and there was this hills have eyes looking dude on crutches banging on the door. Tells me to open the door and he needs a ride because his van had broken down. The guy had his right leg all bandaged up so was pretty sure he was lying. Told him no thank you and he just laughed and hobbled into the night. That job was bad for my nerves. I used to work at City Hall a few years ago as a security guard. There were abandoned jail cells in the basement that haven't been used in years. Part of my duties was to patrol them for any squatters. It was probably my second time patrolling alone and things started to get really weird. I went down to the old prison/holding cells and it's a long narrow hallway about 6 meters wide and 100 meters long with cells on both sides. The hallway was lit with light bulbs hanging from the ceiling. I was walking past the fourth column of cells when the lights went out. I turned my flashlight on and walked back towards the light switch. Right when I was about to turn them back on, the lights flickered on again. I thought to myself, this is F-time getting out of here. I started walking fast past the cells while quickly checking them. I was about halfway when the lights went off again. I heard 2 cells slam. I ran with my flashlight on straight toward the other end of the hallway. I reached the end and ran up to my workstation. I then called my supervisor and asked him if there were any electrical issues that have been reported. He said no. I had 2 hours left on my shift and couldn't leave. I was at my workstation so paranoid and shitting my pants. Being outside on a dark, windy night. I work at a power plant. It's not so bad when the plant is running and you can hear the hum of equipment all around you, but when everything is shut down, you can hear the creaking of all of the metal structures and listen to the groan of a 200 feet tall stack as it sways in the wind. Then there's the whistling and moaning sound the wind makes as it blows through. Couple that with coyotes howling in the woods nearby and you've got yourself a nice basket of nope. Being out in that is what I get paid for though, so off I go. I have so many stories from my 4 years working at Motel 6, Red Roof Inn, and many rent-by-the-week apartments. Here's my favorite, which is not too creepy, but damn it was entertaining. I was working a particular Red Roof Inn and walking around the parking lot when I get a frantic call on the radio around 2 a.m. from the girl manning the front desk saying she needs me there right away. I run over to one of the side entrances and look down the hall where I see some little old man in overalls stomping on a young woman. I run down the hall and shout for him to stop. He looks over to me and I notice that this is not a little old man. It is actually a little middle-aged woman with a mullet, overalls, and a fairly scarred-up face, looked like acne scars. She looks at me and runs out the front door. Meanwhile, the woman on the floor is sobbing. I help her up. The front desk clerk calls the police. and the woman just starts shouting and crying, saying she needs the other woman to come back. Now, it's 2 a.m. and the woman is screaming bloody murder about needing the other woman back. She can't afford the damage to the room, which I hadn't seen yet, and how she's drunk. I try my best to just calm her down and make her quiet down, but eventually I just ask her to keep her voice down out of respect for the other guests. She loses her shit. She starts screaming that she is my elder and I must respect my elders and treat her with dignity and respect. She is no older than 25, me being about 20 at this time. The cops arrive and ask if she wants to file a police report, which she doesn't, but she does want to scream at me for as long as she can and as loud as she can. When the police ask her to quiet down, she turns on them as well, shouting that she is an old woman. Both officers are clearly older than her, and she could be our mother. No, in fact, she is our mother. She continues to rant and rave that she is all of our mother and we must show her respect because being a mother is hard. Now for a while, the cops are just arguing with her, stating that she is clearly not our mother, she has to quiet down, what are you on, etc. This goes on for about 15 minutes when one of the cops, in mid-sentence, just shouts, "What are we doing?" And they both floor the woman. Before you shout abuse, they had been very patient up until that point, even tolerating the woman getting inches from their face to scream at them, and even shoving them. Most cops would have tackled the woman way earlier. They carry her out of the hotel in cuffs and ultimately decide to let her go, saying she can't come back to the hotel. All she truly did was cause a noise disturbance and they said she was not worth the trouble. This whole time she has been shouting that her purse is in the room, so after they kick her out, we all go into the room to look for the purse. This is the first time we entered the room, and shit, was it wrecked. The TV was smashed, pictures on the walls were destroyed, there were literal streaks of blood all over the wall. Whose blood? No idea. The woman we carried out didn't have any visible injuries because while I thought she was being stomped on, she was in fact just hanging onto the other woman's foot as the woman was trying to walk away. At this point, I am standing at the room's door as the cops go on to search the room and this psycho just fucking appears out of nowhere and shoves right past me, screaming at the police to respect their mother and give her things. Literally she shouted, "You can't do this to your mother," as she shoved me out of the way. Now, I have no idea how she got in. The doors outside required a key or the clerk to let them into the lobby and we took her key. The clerk, who was standing right down the hall from us watching us, had absolutely no idea how she got in. She never saw her, the psycho just appeared behind me somehow. However she got back in, the cops tackled her to the ground, dragged her back out of the hotel, and this time watched as she walked away. We never found the purse, but the mullet lesbian did return to pay damages to the room and explain what happened from her perspective. She claimed the other woman was drunk, cut herself, kept slamming her head against the walls, and when Mullet tried to walk away, they clung onto her legs and wouldn't let her go until I came along. I used to work as a night watchman on a large property. Not just a big building, but a large surrounding property as well. Probably 50 acres. Well, this property was not in the best of areas. It was kind of secluded, but had a subdivision nearby. Anyways, it had a really long driveway that was gated. One night I start my rounds by walking out the front door of the place, which was all lit up. As soon as I lock the door behind me and take a step, I hear a woman's voice scream, "Oh my God, somebody please help me." Up at the end of the driveway. It was somewhat faint and I took 5 running steps into the driveway, skidded to a stop and ran back inside to call the cops. They responded with multiple police cars and even a helicopter. They found absolutely nothing. I still think it could have been someone trying to lure me out there. Edit. Another story. When I first started working at that same place, I was enjoying being out on the access roads at night that crisscrossed the property. There was a lake and various parts of the property were wooded. I parked out by the lake and watched the bats flying over the lake catching insects. After a while I hear something in the woods on the hill behind me. Snapping of branches sound. I ignore it and then I hear it again, the noise louder as it had gotten closer. I'm a little creeped out now, but try to ignore it. And then I hear more noise even closer. Maybe 30 feet behind me on the hill. I finally whip out my flashlight and shine it up the hill and I see a big gold buck just standing there. I was a night shift security guard at a hospital when I was 20. This was a relatively nice suburban hospital, no trauma unit, so there wasn't a lot going on at night. We made rounds and occasionally helped to strap angry people down in the ER mostly, We checked people into the morgue. There was a logbook that had to be signed by the guard and the nurse, and paperwork that had to be filed for every corpse that came downstairs. The morgue was really small. A freezer that had room for maybe 2 gurneys and 1 table for bodies in the main room. Around the table were all kinds of plastic containers with biohazard labels. Most had parts that I couldn't identify. One was full of eyeballs. Seriously. I have no idea what they were for. One night I got a call over the radio that a body was headed downstairs. I went to meet the nurse and saw she was carrying a small blanket. Stillborn. We went into the morgue and she laid the bundle down on the table, unwrapping the blanket and revealing a tiny, discolored baby. She checked the tag on it and realized that she had forgotten the paperwork. Corpses are unnerving in their stillness. Bodies move, breath flows, muscles twitch. But not the dead. Not this baby. I stood there with it for a good 10 minutes, my eyes locked to it, waiting for the nurse to return with the papers. Part of the anxiety was the inevitable horror movie playing in my head, where the baby opens its eyes and looks at me. But part of it was just the uncomfortable confrontation with death I was having. I was working a summer internship when I was 18 at a research lab attached to a hospital. Part of the job involves transporting live rats from the lab on the first floor to the animal facilities in the basement. Of course we weren't allowed to use the regular elevators if we were in lab coats or carrying cages since they didn't want us to freak out patients, so we had to take the cargo elevators. One night I was staying late to keep an eye on a rat recovering from surgery. It wakes up, all is good, go to take it back to the basement. When the elevator door opens, there's a hollow-eyed hospital worker next to a dead body on a gurney with a sheet over it. That's how I learned that the morgue was also in the basement. I was in Afghanistan doing a 3-day mission in a valley, Dagab, we have never been in. We had no intel and nobody to let us in on the situation. Think of this as going in dry. We were just there to determine whether or not there was a threat for future supply routes. We set up camp at an old hotel-like structure. It was a rec center but built like a cheap motel, that had been bombed to shit. It still had all the rooms but the face of this building was gone. There were still pieces of wall left which we basically hid behind to pull surveillance. So a few days go by and we see nothing. Our intel has nothing new to report. Our interpreters are quiet. It's time to bug out and give the green light to the forces that need this route. This is about 2 a.m. I am pulling guard while everyone else is getting ready to leave. I have a thermoscope and NVOs. Out of nowhere, I see about 100 people gathering into a mass across the valley and call it in. We stay put. We all pull out our NVOs and try to figure out if this is just some religious crap or another ambush. It was absolutely an ambush. We had been in the area for too long and local fighters had just enough time to gather everyone up to try and overtake us. We were a small special group. We realized we were outnumbered and immediately called in air support. The French owned the battle space at the time and they had Tiger Heelys there within minutes. Next thing I remember was watching hundreds of men with guns though night vision, hearing the sounds of approaching attack helicopters and running at us full force. We are so outnumbered that fighting to the death was the only way out. The Heelys came out of the darkness and literally obliterated everything. Shit. The sound, the smell, the sight. Unreal. Body parts flying everywhere. When looking at this shit through thermal optics or NVGs it looks like rain. So much blood. Imagine your impending doom being suddenly wiped out by attack helicopters in a valley on the other side of the planet. Unreal. Scariest night of my life. Fob Morales Fraser, Kapisa Province, Afghanistan. OF 10. Throwaway just in case. I'm gonna edit in some pics so bear with me. There's a building my company guards that's been abandoned for years. We go in to check and make sure that it's not been vandalized, broken into, you know. Well, I don't really know when it all started because I haven't been working there for a long time, but a lot of the other guards get spooked in there. Some of them even refuse to work it. 9 dense people get a full body chill in the same spot. I've heard feet shuffling up behind me, so have others. I've heard coughing. I've had something touch my back. Someone heard something run up behind him and whisper hi. Lots of instances of kids giggling and running around. But if you go inside and state hey, I'm not gonna bother you if you don't bother me. I'm just checking things out. It'll leave you alone. One night one of our guards felt something watching him, so he turned around and snapped a few pictures. You can see 3 figures. Those were taken within seconds of each other, at the same door. In college, I worked as a police cadet. We didn't have a ton of functions, but handled things like crowd control at campus events, student police outreach, etc. Our biggest duty involved providing night escorts to students and faculty who didn't feel safe. As per everything in college, this started to become abused as a lazy man's taxi. We didn't mind so much, but the PD wanted to discourage non-safety related use, and started having us do walking escorts. We would show up on foot, and walk the person wherever they were going. We weren't armed, and only had a radio, so not really sure we would have prevented an assault anyway, but whatever. This particular school also had a primate research division that was separate from the rest of the campus. It was down a long, unlit road through the woods. During the day, no sweat. At night, not good. Of course, there were rumors at the school about genetic monkey stuff, and that a bunch of the monkeys somehow were able to hang themselves, etc. That said, even as a bio major, and working night security, I never met anyone who actually worked there. Anyway, I'm on the clock one night and get the call to go do an escort at the monkey building. I wasn't that creeped out by the place, it was just a haul to get out there. So, out I go, past the first set of gates, and down the road through the woods. On the way, it dawns on me for the first time that it's the middle of the goddamn night. Why is someone on monkey duty? If it's like the monkey caretaker, wouldn't that be an overnight thing? All of it starts to seem really strange, and of course pointing my flashlight into the woods doesn't help. It just makes the whole thing seem like a monkey-based Blair Witch. Finally, unmolested, I made it to the final perimeter fence around the monkey lab. I radio in that I'm on scene and trying to make contact with the escort appointment. I buzz the intercom, and a woman says she'll be right out. The building she's coming from is probably 400 yards back behind the chain link, which, by the way, is like 25 feet high but not topped by razor wire or anything. Like somehow nobody would be able to scale this thing, so why even bother? Anyway, I see this woman step out of the building and look my way. I'm standing under a light and wave, and she freezes for a few seconds. Just as I'm starting to wonder what is up, she starts heading my way. She gets to the other side of the fence and starts asking about my car. Where is it? What do you mean we're walking? You're a student? Why didn't they send a cruiser? All of this without opening the gate. I'm starting to get pissed because it's cold, and it seems like she's just lazy and didn't want to walk back to campus. But she also seemed really nervous. Or maybe that was me. Either way, one of us was getting nervous. Finally, punches in her code on the other side of the fence, and it rolls open enough for her to come out, then closes. She mentions that if we're walking, we really should get moving. I radio in that I've made contact, and when I turn around, she's like 100 yards down the road at a clip. Not running, but I had to run to catch up to her. As I caught up to her, something started crashing around in the woods. Not right off the road, but deeper in the woods. She somehow starts walking even faster, and I'm trying to point my bobbing light at the noise. Can't see anything, just more Blair Witch shit, now improved with noises. The crunching followed us, and she looked concerned. I kept pointing the light into the forest, and just as we were about to get to the main road, saw what can only be described as a vaguely monkey-shaped shadow. I was terrified. I didn't work security, but I worked midnights at a paper mill. For those not familiar with rural paper mills, they tend to be on the outskirts of town and on massive tracts of land. Our mill has a ton of surrounding forest and huge settling ponds for water reclamation. The whole area is greater than 10 square miles. I was one of the outdoor workers in refuse/waste management, so I did a lot of testing and gathering samples for environmental purposes. The majority of the time I'd leave my work shack at 3 a.m., gather my samples, and nothing would happen. It usually took 45 minutes to an hour to drive from site to site, and it was peaceful, just me and the night sky. At the time, the wolf pack in the area had been spotted close to the town and milled the week before, tasty deer and pets, so I was aware of them. I was walking down the catwalk toward the center of the settling pond to take the readings and gather samples, and I couldn't hear anything over the bubbler, so when I turned around I didn't hear anything, but I saw the outlines of about 8 wolves walking towards my truck between the ponds. I could see the shine of their eyes in the lights, and they were moving with a definite purpose. I just sat still waiting for them to move on, but it definitely left me rattled. I currently work as a security guard for a data center. I started on day shift but got switched tonight. The first week goes off fine. 0000 to 0800 shift, and all I have to do is sit at the front desk and watch cameras to make sure there's nothing going on. One time I'm looking over the cameras and nothing is going on. About 5 minutes later I glance up again and see some black and white blob thing. Potato quality, so I can't really tell what it is. Protocol for this is to investigate and report, so I walk through the data center to the back door where the thing should be and it's nowhere to be seen. I look down both sides of the alley and see nobody. I know somebody isn't messing with me because they would have no idea when I'd see the thing, whatever it was, and know to pull it away when I'd come investigate, as there are no windows. Double taking, I walk back to my desk and investigate the cameras. Whatever it was sitting there in a different spot. WTF.jpg, I sprint back to the back door and I shit you not, there's this miniature cow staring at me with plastic eyes. Confused, I look around for anybody and there's nobody around. I tap it with my boot and I'm able to determine that it isn't a trap or anything, so I pick it up and move it away from the door. Closing the door behind me, I return to my desk, and sure enough it is standing right in front of the front doors. I nearly shit myself because there is no humanly way that anybody could sprint to the front to put the thing there in the time it takes me to walk through the building, as there are several attached buildings to mine. I stare at it for a long time. This time I open the door and toss it in the dumpster. Nope.jpg, everything is calm. About 3 hours later I look up, and the only thing I see in the rear camera is the eye of that cow thing staring lifelessly at me. I fall out of my chair and by the time I get back up it's gone. The camera is so high up and I'd see a ladder if there was one placed. No human alive could reach that high. I noped off of night shift the very next day and I'll never go back. Edit. Even during the day while making my rounds I will hear people talking indistinctly in the basement just around the corners of a very well lit room, only to have nobody there. I have often got a chill down my back and a feeling of dread that I shouldn't be there and need to immediately leave. This only happens when I'm the only one down there. I offhandedly mentioned the above to other guards and workers in the building and 100% of them say they felt it, too. And only in the basement. So I know I'm not the only one. A buddy of mine was a security guard at McGill University in Quebec, California. He worked the graveyard shift and was doing his multiple building round when he went to check the morgue for medical training. On the slab was a little girl laid out with a sheet up to her shoulders. When he turned around she was standing right behind him looking down at her dead corpse. It was actually her identical twin, and her parents followed her in a moment later, but it gave him such heebie-jeebies. Pans and trays were falling at random throughout the night. I seriously thought I was being haunted. I would hear random screams that were being echoed through the walls. Later found out that a raccoon got into my factory and was caught later that morning. I've had many weird moments, but this is one of the top. I was guarding a construction site at night, just relaxing all alone in the tiny shack which the carpenters built for the guards. Suddenly I heard a rustling sound, but I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. As I kept listening I realized it was coming from the floor, right below me. I jumped out of that shack with the reflexes of a panther, spun around and fixed my light on the space under the shack floor. There I saw a pair of little red eyes peeking out at me. And then it emerged. The absolutely hugest possum man has ever encountered. It crawled out and made its way under the tool shed nearby and I never saw it again. Keep in mind that this is in a large city area where any kind of wildlife is extremely rare to see. One night as a night auditor at a small motel, I had this really creepy guy walk in at like 3 o'clock in the morning. He was friendly enough, and it was a really slow night, so I humored his small talk for a while. "What's it like here? You ever go fishing here? What do you do? I mean, what rounds you off as a person? Are you happy? No, I mean like really, are you happy?" This kept going for a while, and he wasn't going anywhere. I suddenly felt trapped with a guy who was living in the shroud of suppressed inner demons, the way you get when you self-medicate with 50 hours of church each week. "Is there anything you want? Come on, anything at all? You want something from McDonald's? I'll run across the street and get you something. Hey, do you need a Halloween costume? I've got tons of costume accessories in my vehicle, you want to take a look?" My answers got more and more firm, and probably a little nervous. I had dealt with violent people, drunks, crazies you could spot from a mile away. But you can't be ready for a guy like this. I can't explain it. I finally just cut him off to say I appreciate it, but I've got everything I need back here. I'm sorry, but unless there's something you need pertaining to your stay, I've really got to get back to work. He was unflinching. He must have gotten the message, but he certainly didn't show it after I said that. He hung around for a few more minutes before finally leaving. I felt like I needed to shower after he left. This guy was that type of over-the-top calm that is almost guaranteed to explode into a brutal and angry rape scene. This isn't as creepy as some of the other stories on here, but I work as an student employee OA, operations assistants, aka taking out trash, setting up for events, etc., in my college's student union. As part of the job, whoever works the last shift, which is normally like 8 p.m. to 12 a.m., has to shut off the lights and lock the building before they leave. I worked this shift once, and before I left, my final job was to mop the cafe we have in the union. This normally takes a while, so I'm there till about 1,230 some nights and everybody else is long gone. As I was locking up and just double checking all the floors, making sure the lights were off, so forth, I could have sworn I kept hearing shuffling or movement. I just assumed it was either the pipes in the building because it was winter and the heat pipes are always making weird sounds, or some other students, since student organization members have access to building and sometimes stay past close. The next morning my manager went into the bathroom and found a homeless guy sleeping in there, who then booked it out before campus police got him. Apparently after checking cameras, the guy snuck in before I locked up and followed me around, making sure to stay out of sight until I left. Never seemed like he was planning on hurting me, but still freaked me out that I was being watched the whole time. I was the night watchman at a beach for a summer. I was sitting around bored, playing on Tinder, when someone started messaging me. I messaged back. Things were going well, until I noticed something strange. Her distance from my location read less than 1 mile. I looked up the east end of the beach, all sand. Down the west end, all sand. Behind me, all brush, for miles, out into the ocean. Nothing. To this day I can't explain my haunted Tinder match. I used to work at Universal Studios, doing security on the night shift. An old couple ran the night shift. Let's call them Adolf and Eva. Eva was dispatch. There were 6 mobile units. We'd check in every hour over walkie-talkies. Unit 1, check, etc. Adolf would always check in with Unit 1, check, and then chirp like a bird. Eva would then respond central, copy, and for Adolf she'd make a meowing sound. One night, after the umpteenth hourly meow, Unit 2 decided to check in with a dog bark, which in turn got everyone going. Unit 3, check, moo. Unit 4, check, ba. Unit 5, check, monkey ooh ooh ah, etc. Then after all 6 units checked in, we hear a sepulchral, and non-existent, Unit 7, check, followed by a good 15 seconds of explosive flatulence. Security guy here, and I mostly attribute this to lack of sleep, but it's fun anyway. So I usually work evenings, 1500 to 2300, and due to a call-off I got off at 2300 on Friday, and was back in at 0500 Saturday. So I come in, caffeinated all to hell, much to the irritation of my partner, a retired cop. He tells me, why don't you go patrol the entire complex? Or something. So away I go. About a half hour later I'm going through the legal department. I hear an object fall behind me and whip around, nothing there. I turn back around and swear I saw the end of a leg finish a step into a side office with an open door. I radio down to ask if anybody else is moving around the building, and my partner replies no. So I slowly creep up to the office, flashlight out, other hand on my pistol, and the office is not only unoccupied, but totally empty. No phone, no computers, no papers, nothing. I later found out that a guy had died on that floor, massive heart attack on the toilet, and the building's original maintenance supervisor also died on property. I'm not the first one to see an apparition during off-hour patrols. When I had just graduated high school, I started working at a truck stop a few miles outside of town. I usually worked evenings, but I had to switch shifts with the night shift guy, so there I was, at 3 a.m., fighting sleep. A car pulls into the parking lot and parks. There's a guy in the driver's seat, crying, and a woman in the passenger seat just staring straight ahead, not moving, no emotion whatsoever. They sat there for what seemed like an hour. Then the guy gets out and comes in. He grabs a few random items and puts them on the counter. The whole time he is looking all around, checking for other people. There was no one but us, for miles. He then stares right into my very soul and says, "It's quiet out here, isn't it? So quiet you can almost hear the angels singing." I muttered something unmemorable and he left. She never moved. I work in IT. At the time I worked for a company that installed security cameras. We installed one at a retirement home, nursing home. Someone had apparently committed suicide and the police were there and they wanted me to show them the video to make sure it was actually suicide and not a homicide staged to look like one. I get there and the apprehension in the air is palpable. I ask what time it happens and what camera etc. and I find the footage. This poor old man was sitting in a stairwell with a gun in his hand crying for what seemed like forever. He then goes to shoot himself in the stomach. The safety is on. He fumbles with it for a bit and then shoots himself in the stomach, keels over and bleeds out. I told my boss I was taking the rest of the day off. I do a lot of long, overnight shifts at my job as a data center operator. We are situated inside the HQ of the company we work for, so a lot of the time I'm in a big corporate office with half the lights out and no one around for 12 hours. We have a large monitor of security cameras set up in our work area, so sometimes I'll catch sight of someone walking through the parking lot at like 0300. The most creeped out I've ever been was probably when I found some office doors open that are supposed to be closed, a break room light on down the hall, they're automated and on timers, and a broken desk phone on the floor of the exercise room, all on my way to go work out. It was spoopy. Worst experience was probably last week. They did some maintenance on our fire and security systems, so when I came in at 0200 to cover part of someone's shift, I set an alarm off. The adrenaline had me on edge the rest of the day. I work in a prison at the state level. I was working the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift because I got mandated. I was out in one of the perimeter vehicles and was stopped in front of the Sally Port to write some paperwork for an alarm that went off. After I finished my log entry I looked up at the Sally Port gate and saw a sergeant we had that retired standing there looking at me. I rubbed my eyes and looked again and he was gone. The sergeant I saw had seen died 6 months prior of cancer. I'm to this day convinced I saw this sergeant's ghost. I have told no one else. One time I was on the phone with a friend working security in a different part of the city. It was around 4 a.m. and out of the blue he says, "Hey man, do you see that?" I look up and that was when I noticed the shack was bathed in a green light. I looked out the window in front of me and saw what can best be described as a small brilliantly green sun. It was just above the tree line and just floating there lighting up the entire landscape. I don't recall if it stayed there until just before I left at 6 a.m. or was still there when I left. I saw it coming from the east, as did my friend, and he worked at a different facility about 15 miles away on the other side of the city. Whatever it was, it would have had to have been extremely high up for both of us to see it at the same angle and coming from the same direction, since it was roughly the same size and shape as the sun as seen from the Earth and it was a few hours before sunrise. My best guess is that it was some rare atmospheric phenomenon similar to Fata Morgana that caused the green portion of the not yet risen sun's light to reflect off the atmosphere, causing a green phantom sun to light up the greater Rochester area. Used to work nights at an old rec center. We were in the middle of a neighborhood, but it was far back on the property and very dark and quiet. The place was built like something out of a video game with secret doors all over the place, tons of creepy hiding places, and the change rooms had those tiny tiles that for some reason always seem to be in horror movies. I had 2 incidents there. Once, just after a guy that worked there passed away, rumored suicide, and I was the one who was now working his shift, when all the lights went out and all the sirens came on. This place was old and so had heavy bomb doors and what sounded like air raid sirens. This was about 2 or 3 a.m., and I was literally by myself. I didn't think I could be any more afraid than I was standing alone in the dark wondering why the backup lights hadn't come on when all the noise just stopped. Still no lights, but also now no sound. The place was like a maze with 1,000 places to hide. I am currently sitting in a well-lit room at 6 p.m. at night, and I am getting freaked out typing this. I called the cops to help me go through the place just in case there was someone in the building messing with the alarms or the emergency systems. The officer who showed up to go through the place with me made it about 3 minutes before noping out. The change rooms were under the bleachers and super dark with more than a dozen individual stalls someone could be hiding in. He called in and asked me to get my relief to come in a little early and he waited with me so I wouldn't be alone. The place just had a super nasty vibe that night. No one ever found anything wrong. However, I waited until it was light out to reset all the bomb doors just in case something was on the other side waiting for me. The second incident was not as creepy. Kept hearing running footsteps all night. Thought I was losing it, and after the previous incident, I was super freaked out. though by then it had been a year or two. Then I saw something flash over the skylight. Called the cops, and two of the beefiest, scariest looking cops I had ever seen showed up. At first I wouldn't let them in since they looked like gangbangers. Turned out they were in plain clothes for some reason. Once I let them in, they headed up to the roof. Turned out we had a few homeless people who had set up camp there. One of the day guys had found a ladder up to the roof a few days before but assumed it had been one of ours and put it away. The campers hadn't run out of food and water yet, so they decided to just hang there, I guess. Still scared the hell out of me after the whole air raid sirens evening I had experienced before. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.